Hello and welcome back to the Living in Luteal podcast. I'm your host Claire and I am really excited about today's topic because we're going to be talking about this kind of trope that we see a lot around how women are kind of crazy when they're premenstrual, and this trope of the crazy woman, because I really, in a nutshell, feel really strongly we do not become crazy in our luteal phase. We become super sensitive to the truth. We become walking bullshit detectors. We really tap into a level of discernment that we might not otherwise be as connected to in other parts of our cycle. And I think the reason that this gets labeled as a trope, as, oh, the crazy woman, oh my God, she's so mental, whatever, is because that is a really powerful thing in a patriarchal society and in a society that would like for us to look the other way at our shadow and would like for us to continue just ignoring everything that is wrong and walking in the direction of the status quo and just going with that. And that premenstrual truth serum kind of threatens that. It threatens that. It threatens to kind of just completely implode on that and just tear that to shreds, as we just get really, really fucking clear on what is important, what does and doesn't matter. So I really want to emphasize that. And I think there's this trope around the crazy woman. I remember when I was at uni, we actually had a conversation with one of the guys in the climbing club. I used to be a rock climber. From a side note, we had a conversation and he was like, oh my God, you guys are so mental. And it was like, are we, or are we just outspoken? Are we just like bold women? I've always kind of had that sass and that kind of like fuck it kind of attitude, which I think that's quite common with women who struggle with their premenstrual phase, is that there's this kind of, we can kind of sense that there's a lot of power there and we really lean into that, but then there can also be this kind of backlash and shame and people pleasing and all of that. So probably a topic for another episode. But yeah, and we were talking about it and we were like, do you know what, I know that you mean it as an endearing term, like, oh my God, you guys are so mental, but actually think about the implications and where that has come from. I mean, we think back to like hysteria and women literally being put in asylums for being emotional. Like there's a real connotation there that women's emotions and stuff like that is not acceptable. And that if we are quote unquote emotional or being sensitive or just showing any level of emotion, or certainly an intense level of emotion, perhaps not any level of emotion, but those more intense feelings, were labelled crazy. So there's kind of that trope around the crazy woman that we have in society. And I know that a lot of this comes as like a harmless joke, but I just think it's really important to think about the roots of where it comes from, because, yeah, sure, it's a harmless joke, but is where it's rooted from harmless? I don't think so. And I think whilst it's important to acknowledge that, yes, men suffer in this patriarchal society as well, and that they have their own battles around being emotionally expressive, if a man is passionately, almost angrily speaking about something that they think is wrong, they're not labelled crazy, they're labelled as passionate, right? And I think then we have to think, why is that not the same for women? So that's just a little bit on the crazy trope. And then the other thing that comes around this of like being crazy when you're on your luteal phase and that kind of thing is this idea that like we aren't ourselves. Quote, I'm doing air quotes. We aren't ourselves. I'm just not feeling myself. I'm not feeling like me when I'm premenstrual. And whilst I get the sentiment of this, I want to explore this a little bit deeper, because ultimately the parts of us that are showing up in our premenstrual phase are parts of us. They are parts of you, right? They're not parts of somebody else that are showing up. They're parts of you. And by going, oh, I'm not myself, we're kind of disowning, well, we are disowning those parts of ourselves. We're saying, oh, I am only me when I am this certain thing when I'm in this box. And yeah, sure, we might have tendencies to be a certain way and we might feel a bit off kilter and our energy is off. Sure, I get that. But there's this shaming narrative with, oh, I'm not myself, when these very valuable and very important parts are showing up in our premenstrual phase, like the critic, like the part that's responsible for boundaries, and when we label that as like, oh, that's not me, that's not me, that's not ourselves, I'm not myself, we're shaming those parts and pushing them away, and also not leaving room for the full spectrum of our experience as human beings. That as human beings, we are not just one thing, that we have many, many different facets to us. And yes, we might have an inclination to kind of lean into a specific facet, and that is kind of the energy that we're at home with. And in the menstrual cycle, you can talk about this in terms of where you feel most at home in your cycle. So for me, that's actually my inner autumn. Having struggled with it so much, it's quite cool to see that now my inner autumn is kind of my natural home. That's where I feel most powerful. It's where I feel like most rooted in who I am. So we have that, but we also have these other spectrums of ourselves, And imagine it the other way around. Like if you're going like, let's say we lived in this like alternate universe where the norm, well, the healthy was to be kind of outspoken and really embodying that premenstrual kind of vibe, right? It's like having that as the norm, and then when you're in your inner spring and you're feeling playful, going, oh man, I'm just not feeling myself. I'm feeling so playful. I'm not feeling this like and this outspokenness and this power. I'm just feeling really playful and light. It's like, how ridiculous would that be, right? So it's just this kind of conditioning of what we think is good and bad and what we label as acceptable and what we really like so strongly identify with. And shadow by definition is the aspects of ourselves that exist, the things that are true about us that go in direct conflict with our sense of self, with our egoic kind of image, our self-image. So of course you're not going to quote unquote feel like yourself because you're so attached to this being, the bubbly, kind, giving woman that you're kind of shunning that aspect of yourself that actually is like, fuck, no, I need this. Like, these are my boundaries. This is my truth, standing in my power. So just something to think about with that in terms of next time you catch yourself going, oh, I'm not really like feeling like myself. And I found myself saying this a couple of times. I mean, I've found myself saying this loads of times, but more specifically, this kind of idea that it's not me, I'm not myself, kind of came up for me in a different way when I was saying, oh, I feel really disconnected to myself. And I think I was in, at the time, I was in the void right before my bleed, like the 2 days before my bleed, I was properly in the void and there was just this emptiness and nothingness. And I was like, oh God, I just feel like really disconnected from myself. And my menstruality mentor reflected back to me. She went, well, are you disconnected from yourself? Because actually what I'm hearing is that you are incredibly connected to what your experience is. You are hyper aware that you're feeling off kilter, that there's this emptiness, that there's this vastness, that you're in the void, that there's this like hopelessness. What I'm hearing is that you're incredibly connected to yourself. It's just not the experience your ego is wanting to be connected to, if that makes sense. So I think often if our experience isn't in alignment with what we want to feel or our self-image, we're going to go, oh, that's not, I'm not myself, I'm not myself, or, oh, I feel really disconnected from myself, this kind of narrative that if it doesn't fit that box that we have put ourselves in, then it isn't us. And I have found it to be true that when we allow for all of our experience and all of our parts to be like, yeah, you are part of me, like welcoming home all those parts, even the ones that right now maybe you don't like very much and maybe you're pretty ashamed of them. But the more you can grow that capacity to welcome them home with compassion and be with them, not necessarily say like, yeah, great, I'm going to be a total asshole every month. Like, no, I'm not saying that, but like welcoming these parts home as a part of you that holds some sort of inherent value. When you grow your capacity to do that with these shadow aspects of yourself and with these PMS and luteal phase kind of things that can come up, these emotional things that can come up, the struggle eases. This like huge internal battle that happens every month eases. It's like letting out, I mean, I can like feel it in my body as I'm talking about it. It's like letting out a big sigh. It's like, oh, okay. I don't have to fight against that. I don't have to like push that away. And they don't have to work as hard to be heard. They don't have to speak as loudly or shout as loudly, and be like, really driving these very strong feelings or experiences in our premenstrual phase. And they can kind of chill out a bit and they go, do you know what? I know she's going to listen. I know she's going to listen. She's not like totally disowning us. And so we can just kind of like, pull a little bell and be like, hey, excuse me, I'd like some attention. And then they can, and it doesn't always work like that. Obviously, they still have their patterns and ways of dealing with things. But my point is that the more you can welcome home your full spectrum of your experience, the more self-love you're going to feel, the more self-esteem, the more confidence, and the less you're going to feel this like exhaustion from fighting that inner battle all the fucking time. You're going to feel so much less exhausted from having that battle of like, oh fuck, this isn't me, this isn't who I am, da da da. And like our experiences aren't who we are, but I think there's real value in going, okay, no, this is a part of me. This might not be who I am, but it's a part of me and it has value, and I'm going to give it the time. I'm going to give it the space to be seen and witnessed and understood, because it's a part of me and that means it's valuable to me. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to say on this. I'm going to leave it there. I so appreciate your time and energy in listening to this, and I hope you have found this thought-provoking and nourishing for some part of your soul. And if you have any questions or something did resonate or something didn't resonate and you'd just like to reach out and chat about it, please do reach out to me by email at claire@lovinginluteal.com. I love to hear feedback and I love to hear from people who are listening to the show and know how it's landing. So yeah, I'll see you next time.